Hey there, Radio Free Pizza Gourmets. Hi, Mom. This is Zach, aka Zacharoni Pizza. Thanks for tuning in to our 2024 election spectacle. Joining me today is my friend Cameron, to whom I'll apply the food-themed nickname Camburger. What's
Hey, buddy, how we doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Uh, I'm good. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here. This is going to be fun.
It's a pleasure and an honor to have you. All right. So I've been begging you to join me now for a month or so to join me in this little broadcast. Can you tell our viewers why I was begging you to join me?
I think the main reason is that I am a leftist who is living amongst Trump country, in addition to us being old friends.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it is like probably 80% us being old friends. You being a leftist in Trump country is definitely like the key. That's the relevant thing for this election spectacle or the selection spectacle with that. And just so everyone watching, yeah, just so you're all aware, I would say, a former leftist for the reason that I abandoned the left right paradigm. And also, in the city of Minneapolis, I am surrounded by liberals who think of themselves as leftists, but who share none of my values. And so
Yeah.
it became pointless for me to identify with leftism at all. However, you have the complete mirror image situation going on. You're in Trump country, and it just seems more relevant to make such distinctions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because I'm in Trump country, it's even easier for me to find people who share my leftist values because there's not a lot of us. Like at all. There's not a lot of us at all. Both alienating, but also it's almost easier to organize because the people who share my values are, I've already found them.
Hey, for sure. Yeah, gosh, I don't think that I have bothered with any kind of organizing or
hmm
trying to be involved to have any solidarity with leftist interest groups since probably 2020. Uh,
I would say I organized really heavily from 2016 to about 2019, and I've been like intermittently organizing or at least joining up with people who are organizing whenever I find it to be fun. Yeah.
That's a really good rule of thumb. I was referring a moment ago to the divisions within leftism or leftists not actually being the sort of people who I want to associate with in
Right.
Minneapolis specifically. Do you see anything, because you're in such a much more conservative area, do you see
Yeah.
any divisions within the conservative bloc that you might draw an analogy with?
As far as like divisions, there's a lot of libertarians here, but I would say a lot of the conservatives lean libertarian in a lot of ways. Maybe because guns are so popular here. But as far as divisions along the right, there's not a lot of people on the right who are organizing, especially here. And I think a lot of that is because they don't need to. As of the current polls, Trump is winning here by a significant margin. And so the idea of needing to enact like direct action or any sort of organizational structure that would feed into their cause just isn't necessary. And so the divisions, they might exist, but I'm certainly not privy to them. And I don't know if they would even really be necessary here.
All right. I suppose my immediate reaction was to say, "Oh, that's nice to hear," but that's mainly because I'm interested in social cohesion. I like it when people have solidarity as a community, and
Yeah.
it's a shame that left-right divisions would prevent that from being like a broad solidarity. But I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I appreciate the fact that these conservatives can gather together and keep their eyes on the prize, if you will. I'm not entirely sure what the prize is for them, but nonetheless, Naturally. It's something that I feel like I could learn from in some respect.
Yeah, I feel like at least here, the traditional conservative values are under no threat. And yeah, they're not going to go away anytime soon here.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I can't say that they're too worried. There are more extremist right-wing groups here, but I don't think they've popped up yet.
Uh, yeah. As soon as the FBI makes a call or whatever, I personally, I'm at the point where every quote unquote extremist group, meaning both white nationalists and Antifa, are just stirred up by the security state.
For sure. If anything, they're operating within it. And yeah, maybe you could.
Hey, I don't mean to draw any kind of like insulting analogies, if you will. I just to back up and make a clarification, it's not like I think everybody involved in Antifa or any kind of leftist extremist group, for lack of better words, like the sort of group that the government would identify as extremists.
Yeah.
I don't think that the majority of those people, I would say 90% of them, are extremely well meaning, sincere people. But I do think that leftist groups are just as vulnerable as conservative groups to being like January 6th, for example.
Hmm.
I don't think we've discussed this at all, but I read January 6th as the FBI and the security state is just stirring up conservatives to give themselves an excuse to implement more top-down controls and so on. And I I, I see the same risk running with leftist groups as well.
Yeah, definitely. You probably would have more of that happening in Minneapolis. Where I am, as far as groups on the right, there was a neo-Nazi organizer called Matthew Heimbach. I think I'm getting his last name correct, but he's in prison right now, and so his whole group does not exist anymore. So it's like thinking about him stirring things up with the surveillance state, or there being state actors who are contributing to what I saw at the time, this is maybe 2017, as a very real threat of like white supremacists, doesn't exist in the same way that it used to. And I think what I mean by that is it's not in the limelight. Like he was organizing in a very direct, open way and militantly. And that hasn't been the case since his ass has been in prison.
That's great. Jeez. I guess he must have been one of the 10% who are actually dedicated to the cause or something. You know, not
Yeah, certainly, and I'm sure the Aryan Brotherhood are taking care of him right now. So
uh,
we'll see. We'll see what happens.
oh man. Okay, getting back to the election for a second. About this neo-Nazi and so on. I'm curious
Mhm.
about your read as somebody who's still, more involved than I am, certainly. Do you see any major risk of neo-Nazis returning in, public force if Trump were to win or if Kamala were to win?
I think, at least in my area, whenever Trump won previously, people were like very much empowered. And so I think that's whenever the neo-Nazi groups felt like maybe they had enough political support to make a difference or perhaps mobilize in a way that is bigger than they've ever mobilized before. Because I know that a Heimbach's group, at the very least, did exist before 2017. But the political uproar that he caused, and which in turn made local anti-fascist groups emerge, was not nearly as prevalent. Like I know that he was out there and I know he was doing shit, but once Trump was elected, we started seeing rallies. There was one in Pikeville, Kentucky, where the Kentucky State Police actually separated the Heimbach's militant neo-Nazis and the anti-fascists who were on the other side, which hadn't happened before then, at least to my knowledge. So yeah, I do think that there will be some sort of far right empowerment that's going to happen if Trump were to win. And I think that's going to manifest itself in violence against trans people, an increase in mass shootings, and an increase in neo-Nazi organizing, especially public neo-Nazi organizing, which is what I saw 8 years ago.
Mm.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'd like to about this public neo-Nazi organizing. I'm getting an image in my head of Blues Brothers, those neo-Nazis from Illinois. Is that the kind of public like walking around with German swastika flags and so on?
Yeah, at the Pikeville event, it was very much like that, which is both cringe, hilarious, and terrifying at the same time. And I think the way his group operated was by going into impoverished rural areas and trying to rally around workers' rights and things like that, especially like almost preying on the poverty of like people who are susceptible to white nationalism.
Mm.
Which, yeah, he was effective. Like he had a militant backing. And I can't say the size of that, but at least at Pikeville, I'd say there was at least 20 people with him. And they had shields and uniforms. Like they were militant neo-Nazis. Um,
I see. So they, if I'm understanding correctly, they recruited by going to rural, impoverished areas and basically saying it's the Jews' fault or it's the blacks' fault or whatever. It's has nothing to do with
to
imperialist capitalism or what have you.
Yeah, to an extent. I want to imagine he said things with a little bit more of a like a convincing rhetoric. But again, I think he's like a tool, so I don't know exactly what he was saying. He very clearly was successful, at least to an extent, up until his arrest, of course, in which case both the anti-fascist organizing and neo-Nazi organizing that happened in the area, I would say dissipated because there wasn't that direct conflict anymore.
Ah, and they didn't have a figurehead like
Exactly. Yeah, there was not a central organizer. And I think the same thing happened with people like Richard Spencer, which I know that he's has returned and is in public eye again, but he did withdraw, and I think we saw people who rallied around him withdraw as well. But also that opens up the can of worms of the greater online, like far neo-Nazi, like Boogaloo kids that were all over the internet at that time. I can't say maybe these things went away from the public eye, but they still very much exist in internet communities and so on. These people are still out there.
hmm,
And if Trump were to win, I think we would see them. They might go outside.
interesting. I have a complicated, not this doesn't really complicate it, but it adds a new dimension to my previous question. What I recently saw, it was a quote from Elon Musk, and it's nothing that I posted in the Discord chat or anything like,
Hmm.
but I don't know if you're aware, but Elon Musk has positioned himself to have some kind of position as a government waste czar, if you will, which is hilarious because a man who made like his whole fortune from government subsidies is going to be deciding where the government is wasting money. That's insane. Yeah, I know.
I had not heard that. That is insane.
This is another reason you're a good person to talk to because I am now spending most of my social media time on Twitter, which is
Hmm.
supposedly, I forget the honest scales, but it is supposedly a right wing outlet, whereas I don't know exactly where you spend most of your time, but I talk to you most often on Instagram, which is
Absolutely.
a left wing outlet. So with this in mind about Elon Musk becoming a government waste czar, his recent quote that I saw was in effect saying, yeah, when Trump wins, he and I and all of us are going to take care of government waste. However, that's going to mean like major austerity measures. I'm using the word austerity. He, I don't think, used that word, but that's the way I read it. And so when you have major austerity measures coming in, that's going to increase the economic vulnerability of those poor and impoverished rural neighborhoods, which could then help people like this Heinbach character recruit to their extremist right wing organizations. With that in mind, do you think that these right wingers and so on really understand the like where these problems come from? I suppose is a simple way of putting it.
I cannot speak to their political intelligence. And I would imagine that maybe it's lacking, but I don't know. I didn't. That's really interesting, dude. And I'm curious as to what he thinks that is going to look like.
From my recollection, it meant like cuts to Social Security, for example.
Okay, gotcha. I can't really speak to right-wing intelligence. The people around me, like in my immediate community, who I very much am operating incognito. I don't really talk about my politics here. And so a lot of people on the right, and again, these are normal, everyday people, will confide in me with a lot of their politics. And I think that they believe a lot of nonsense, which should come as a surprise to no one.
My
Yeah.
knee jerk is just to say leftists believe a lot of nonsense too, but
Yeah, absolutely. I think people on the right, especially here, are afraid. And I think that's what leads so many people down like the libertarian, like conspiracy theory rabbit hole, at least in my experience of meeting people and actually having political discussions with people who I ordinarily would disagree with or even be disgusted by politically. Yeah, there's not a tremendous amount of nuance in what most people believe, and I do think so much of it is based around fear. The immigration crisis being one of the things in which people on the right in my communities, my dad even, are terrified of the immigration crisis, and I think have largely blown it out of proportion. Not to say that it's not a crisis. I believe that it is very much a crisis. But yeah, like I live in a really well-off, nice, predominantly white neighborhood, and there's this threat, this imaginary threat of deadly immigrants coming here and murdering people, and I don't see that as a possibility whatsoever. But that is a common narrative here. And I think it drives people into looking towards someone as, like with Donald Trump as someone who can provide a safety net and can create measures to stop that from happening, even though that seems, at least to me, very much impossible. Especially in my like immediate vicinity. I don't see that being an issue whatsoever.
I have to agree with you on that because, from my understanding of the immigration crisis in the United States, the immigrants that come are being housed in primarily urban environments. Like, I hesitate a little bit because I think to myself, is Springfield, Ohio really considered an urban environment anymore? But nonetheless, that, by the way, that's where the Haitians were eating the cats or
Mhm.
whatever. But still, I think that in general, rural communities will be unaffected, at least in terms of like first order primary effects. They would, now I'm even rethinking that because if it were the case that promoting immigration or allowing illegal immigration were simply about suppressing wages, then rural communities would have something to worry about there. But nonetheless, it seems like it wouldn't really hit them first.
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine it would hit them very much at all. And I do have a unique perspective insofar as I do spend a lot of time in an urban environment. I'm in southern Indiana, and so that urban environment again is very conservative. But I spend a lot of my time, especially like whenever I'm working, in a more rural environment. I grew up in a small community. I live in a small community, and I would say I'm almost fairly certain I have maybe one of one leftist in my town.
Hmm.
I am the only one.
Oh, geez. And out of a population of how many, if I may ask?
Several thousand, like maybe 2,000 to 5,000.
Wow.
Yeah, and I don't know many of Gen Z or like younger kids who I know probably are more left-leaning or at least more progressive, certainly than the area that like I'm living in and the environment and culture that I grew up in. I think at least in here there probably is a little bit more of a progressive leaning amongst the youth. But yeah, as far as isolation goes, I'm about as isolated as you can get.
Oh,
But again, that's in the rural area. Whenever I go to the urban environment that I spend a lot of my time in, there is a small group of very like-minded leftists who share, I would say, almost identical values as I do. And so I'm not completely isolated, but whenever I'm in the rural communities that I spend a good amount of my time in, Yeah, I'm absolutely isolated, completely by myself. And I think whenever I go to vote tomorrow, which I'll be voting, let's see, 2 miles from where I am right now, I will certainly be the only leftist there, without a doubt. And I'm interested in commenting on that further after the fact because I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to the people around me. And I might even try to have some casual conversations with people in line of the polls, especially if I wear this sweater.
Show me the sweater, please.
Let me see. It says, "Come
Please.
on, America, please don't burn old glory," but I've marked out don't. So it says, "Come on, America, please burn old glory."
Why are you trying to make Americans feel bad about themselves? I have a
Again, I want to have these conversations with people in the polling, like at the polling booths, in the line. And I will admit that a large part of that is to fuel our discussion.
Oh, great. Hey, this is a good excuse for me to call you tomorrow, at least. So thank you.
Yeah, please. I think hopefully I'll have something interesting, if not downright hilarious, to talk about.
All right. I bet somebody in line will complain. Those Haitian cats are illegally voting with mail-in ballots.
Yeah, whatever. Just burn the flag. Who cares?
Okay. So going back, I asked a pretty leading question a few moments ago, a lazy question, actually. Do you feel like right wingers have a very good sense of what the problem is? Just to paraphrase. I'd like
Right.
to rephrase that with I don't want to say leftists in this case because I am specifically meaning liberals, like Kamala voting liberals.
Gotcha.
Now, I think that you and I have already made it pretty obvious to anyone watching this that we don't really think that liberals have a good understanding of things. I'm going to make that clear right now. I don't think that they do. But I am wondering, what is your opinion on the liberal viewpoint? What do you think liberals believe the problem with the United States is? And what do you think they believe the solution would be?
Oh man, that's a hell of a question. I don't fuck with liberals, dude.
You know that I do just almost against my will, like you've
Yeah, absolutely. You're
and so on.
very much surrounded by them. Yeah, I don't know. As far as the problem that liberals would see, I would say Trump is one of the problems that liberals would see as far as an obvious boogeyman. Yeah, I feel like even whenever it comes to the Israel-Palestine conflict, like the genocide in Palestine right now, liberals are a mixed bag. They're hard to predict. I don't like liberals. We've spent time amongst them. In a lot of ways, I find them to be more annoying than the conservatives around me. I don't know. Liberals are so nonsensical. And in me, at least my politics, I have so much more in common with libertarians here than I would ever have in common with a liberal.
I would imagine so, actually.
Yeah.
Knowing your politics, would it be fair to call you an anarchist? Would that still apply?
I would say that's the most accurate label for me. I would say perhaps I lean more of the green anarchist, but again, that's just like having more of a focus on both the actions that I find permissible and the immediate threat to practically everything. Like I believe climate change is the greatest problem that we face, and I do believe that we should mitigate that by nearly any measure imaginable. So yeah, that's my take as a green anarchist, which puts me at odds with liberals, puts me at odds with conservatives, but libertarians, we have a little bit of overlap, and I've been criticized by my leftist friends for almost indulging in that overlap, but they're fun. They're fun to talk to, and I can tolerate it in a way that most people on the left can't. And I also I'm down to listen to conspiracy theories anytime, honestly.
Me too, for sure.
Yeah.
So I'll leave that aside for right. You made a point a few moments ago about liberals and the division within the liberal slash left political bloc in terms of their opinions about Gaza, the genocide going on in Gaza.
Right.
I recall, here's just an example of how annoying and completely unprincipled I find liberals to be. I recall a conversation that I think was late August, maybe mid-September, whatever. I recall this conversation with an older gentleman. I suppose he was, let's say, mid 60s. And we were discussing the, presidential contest between Trump and Harris. And I made the point that listen, it's really hard to vote for somebody who is already supporting the genocide. Obviously, Trump is not going to be any better in terms of standing up for human rights or anything.
Right.
However, it's hard to put your neck out there. And this fellow obviously already knew that I was not going to be voting for this horrible woman. But he then makes the point that it's such a shame when people are single issue voters. And I'm like, dude, genocide? Like, that's the biggest single issue there
Yeah.
could be.
Yeah.
What is wrong with you, man?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. That's the biggest single issue. It's I care about climate change, but is climate change actively murdering people right now? It's not that obvious.
Oh gosh. So yeah, liberals have in my lifetime, the liberal position has so easily twisted itself and reconfigured itself. Like when I was in high school, they were anti-war. Now they can't get enough of it.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, they were pro-free speech. Now it's, oh, we need a government ministry to tell us if something is AI generated or not. Gosh, you people just have no faith in humanity or yourselves. It's really quite disgusting in a lot of ways. But
Yeah.
that's why one of the reasons that I've abandoned that country for right now.
Yeah. For right now, what does that mean?
I do have a return flight that I could get refunded, but I guess what it really means is that I would have to come back for my cat and my books.
The only things worth returning for, am I right?
Yeah. All right. So let's see. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the future of things. Now, I asked you at the start of this conversation if you thought that right wing neo Nazis would be more likely to start some shit if Trump was elected. I think, and I'm putting this to you before I ask you about the outcome of a Harris election, but
Mhm.
what do you think about the possibility that what I call pan-leftist counter gangs? I believe I stole that phrase from Rainier Shea, but could have been stolen from somebody else. I'm not entirely sure. What do you think about my thinking here that if Trump wins, a greater threat in terms of sheer civil unrest and so on would come from these pan-leftist counter gangs? For example, there was a major riot in DC in 2017 upon Trump's inauguration. Do you think that these Antifa or pan leftist groups would be as motivated as the right wing groups? Would they feel like, oh, we need to go even bigger and harder now because of the threat of neo Nazis feeling empowered?
So the event you're talking about is January 20 or Jan 20 is what was often referred to. And I paid a lot of attention to it whenever that happened. It was oftentimes the focus of a lot of my organizing. And I can maybe talk a little bit more in depth about that. But for now, I would say I almost hope so. I
Uh,
almost hope so. I think that January 20th set a precedent for civil unrest and revolt in a way that I personally am in favor of. Primarily, property damage was what typically happened. And we also were able to see the response of the police in Washington, D.C., performing a mass kettle. All of those people were arrested. And I think only a few of them were actually charged. The majority of people who were responsible and involved in January 20th didn't get charged, or rather, the charges didn't stick. And yeah, I think it set a precedent for both what civil unrest is going to look like under the Trump administration and also what the police response is going to look like. And as far as I know, that was spot on. During the George Floyd uprising, the same tactics were used both by leftists and the police. So we got a glimpse into what that is going to look like.
Now I would like to go to the Harris outcome. I think that most people probably estimate that Harris is unlikely to win this upcoming selection tomorrow. It's really hard to imagine, in fact. It's easy to imagine the election just being outright stolen. That's not out of the realm of possibility at all. But I would like to ask you, in either that situation or in the event that she actually does legitimately win the popular vote and electoral vote, what do you think that the response might be from either pan leftists or from right wing neo Nazis or any other kind of extremist group, I suppose?
That for me is more difficult to predict, but I want to say it will be similar to what happened whenever Biden was elected, which for me would seem like business as usual. And so I can't imagine there being a tremendous shift, especially like a mobilization of the left, unless people on the right mobilize, which again, I think the likelihood of that happening is significantly higher under the Trump administration. And as far as Harris winning, whenever Trump won, I was positive he was going to win. I was positive. I knew it on election night. I woke up and I was not surprised. I was like, of course he won. And this time I don't quite have that feeling, but I don't know. He's got to win, right? I don't know. I don't have that feeling, but I if I wake up whenever, Wednesday, Thursday, and Trump has won, I will not be surprised at all.
Mm,
But under the like, if Harris were to win, business as usual. That's the way I see it.
mm.
Hmm.
Okay, that's interesting on its own because business as usual, I interpret as the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, but like it has been under the Biden administration, there's really not much in terms of civil uprising or civil unrest, at least compared to the kind that we saw under the Trump administration.
Right.
That's interesting. It would take a Trump victory to signal the end of the American Republic or the end of the American just civil good spiritedness. All right. And just so we only have less than a minute left because apparently I needed to subscribe to Zoom. So is there
Oh, buddy.
anything you'd like to get out before we pause and resume again tomorrow?
I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow, and this has been a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, same to you. Thank you very much. All right. We'll check in again tomorrow and see how the polls are looking, I guess.
Absolutely.
All right, cool. Maybe turn to more geopolitics too. That's more my game.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to it.
Radio Free Pizza.
Hello, my friend.
Hey, how you doing, fella?
Not too bad. Good to be back as Camburger.
Welcome back, hamburger. For those of you who might have forgotten, I'm Zacharoni Pizza for some ridiculous reason dating to like 10 years ago. But anyway, how was your day? You went to the polls, right?
I did go to the polls. It was um mostly uneventful, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing bad happened, nothing good happened.
Well, yeah, I guess that's kind of like going to the polls.
Yeah.
Did you wear that sweatshirt?
I I did, and I don't think people understood exactly what it was about. I think the American flag was plenty distracting, and yeah, not a lot of deep thinkers at the polls this time.
Oh gosh. Well, I'm glad no one gave you any crap for it. At least not as much crap as I'm inclined to give you for it.
I'm happy to be given crap for it. It's fine.
All right, cool. I mean, I didn't make this clear yesterday, but I do think that burning the American flag is not a great way to win mass support. I mean, I don't identify with despite the shirt that I'm wearing right now. But I don't actually identify with the flag as if it's like represents me or my community
Yeah.
necessarily. But at the same time, I know that a lot of people do think that. So that's why that's why I give you kind of some crap for it. That's all.
Yeah, I don't think burning a flag really amounts to too much. I have a friend who burned an Israeli flag recently, and
That
it
amount.
yeah, that actually may be tied into his court case. So,
Ooh, shit.
but he'll be all right. As far as burning the American flag, um, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And tactically, I think it's a tool for building affinity and trust amongst whoever you do activism with. There's a unifying component around anti-nationalism that I really enjoy.
All right. Well, hey, I can't say that I've never burned an American flag either. Like Instagram story archives or whatever.
Of
Uh,
course.
yeah. Uh, I think of it something like, before we get into the actual meat of this conversation with the election,
hmm
I think of it as in the late 60s and early 70s when anti-war activists would spit on the uniforms of returning soldiers. Yeah, that I understand you're trying to spit on the uniform, uh, but there's a human being wearing it, and they
Yeah,
uh,
there's no one wearing the American flag. And if they were wearing the American flag, that might be a slightly different story. It depends on the rhetoric that they're spitting at me. So,
understood. All right. Well, let's see. I have bookmarked a bunch of tweets related to all the news of today. And
excellent.
gosh, so, oh man. Okay, so here's the first one. And a lot of these come from Hotspot, which is at Hotspot on Twitter. That's Nico House's outlet. And
Okay.
here's just the first one, since this is kind of supposed to be a geopolitics themed conversation. Uh, the US military is set to conduct a test launch of a hypersonic nuclear missile hours after polls close on election day today,
Fuck.
accompanied with
Fuck.
a screenshot of the Daily Mail, headline about that. Uh,
Okay.
so yeah, things are getting a little tense, I guess, both domestically and internationally, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's no better time to test out a missile. I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, we're all distracted, right?
I suppose. Yeah, I mean, gosh, uh, anyone watching this can go to the Discord server that we created or I created and just load it up with a bunch of links as far as like reasons to believe that Trump is being positioned to start a war with Iran, more or less on behalf of Israel, maybe for his own ego, but more or less on behalf of Israel. And so seeing something like that is a little concerning to me. That's all. Ah, boy.
Yeah. I guess subsonic implies that it's quiet. Is that is that...
Oh, hypersonic. These
Oh shit.
missiles that fly at like, I think Mach 6, maybe even Mach 8 or 10 is the upper limit of hypersonic missiles. But
Damn. Wouldn't even see it coming.
exactly, yeah. So, the elites will finally have their way, their grand depopulation agenda, I guess.
That'd be an effective method for sure.
Gosh. So you went to the polls. Have you seen any of this, like a lot of crazy nonsense about just all the malfeasance, I would put it, at the polling stations? I don't know if you encountered any of this, being not in a swing state, but man, so I will stop scrolling through my bookmarks in a moment, but here's just my favorite one because it's more on the trend of establishing whatever candidate gets into office is going to have some beef with some other major global power. Uh,
Mhm.
Georgia's Secretary of State says bomb threats at polling stations in Georgia are of, quote, Russian origin.
Interesting, interesting. I didn't see any Russians at my polling station.
All right,
If I,
good.
yeah,
Those, those Ruskies.
if I had, that would have been the very first thing I mentioned.
Okay, good. Well, I mean, I'm glad you didn't see him, and I'm glad that I don't estimate you to be the typical American who has a very like Rocky Four kind of idea of geopolitics. Like, oh, the bad Russian is coming to kill our hero. Uh,
Yeah, you're correct. I don't feel that way. Not, I mean, it's not the worst movie, but in terms of geopolitics, it's not. I can't relate.
wow, yeah. Honestly, I've never seen any of the Rockies, I don't think, but
Okay, you're fine.
that was too much. Okay, cool.
Yeah, you're good.
All right. Well, man, so this thing, Russia is obviously the target of Democrats generally, and it doesn't seem like they're too friendly to Iran either. But for whatever reason, the way it's shaking out in domestic American politics is Republicans are kind of cool with like I wouldn't even say kind of cool. It's just the paleo-conservative minority of the Republicans is not buying it. Like they look at Lindsey Graham talking about how oh they have so much lithium buried underneath Ukraine. We can't let Russia get that. And some paleo conservative, like I guess all paleo conservatives don't buy into that. So that's at least heartwarming. But I I think that they would be quite on board with attacking Iran, and that sucks. I mean, I don't know your opinion on the country of Iran. I am.
Um,
Go ahead.
I know that they hate America, and most of the videos that I've seen involves lots of Iranians in the street chanting "Death to America." Um, that's not my slogan, but it is I think it's funny. I do think there's some honesty to it insofar as like a sentiment that's probably shared more universally, even outside of Iran. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, I aside from that, I do have some concerns, and I think especially under a Trump presidency, it seems extremely likely to me.
Oh yeah. God, I certainly agree with you, and I think his assassination of I forget what rank he was, but Soleimani, the general, I
Right.
general from Iran. Yeah, that's he is. Gosh, man, it's kind of funny how this fellow is just so charismatic and so able to just win people onto his side. Like, God, I was even, although I have no real affection for the man, when I saw a clip of him talking about the group White Dudes for Harris. Have you ever heard of that group?
No, I haven't.
It's it's just as cringe as it sounds. But a week or two ago, I saw Trump a clip of him saying, "White dudes for Harris. I'm not worried about white dudes for Harris. Their wives and their wives' lovers are going to vote for me."
Oh my God. I'm assuming the white dudes for Harris have no hidden agenda.
No, they just happen to be dumb. That's all.
Yeah, dumb cucks apparently.
Yeah, for real. Uh, so yeah, God, man. So he wins a certain kind of affection for me in his sheer trolling ability. And maybe that's just because I've become so disgusted with liberals in general. But
Yeah, yeah, probably, my friend.
nah, yeah, I suppose so. Ah, fuck. Mm. So anyway, getting back to geopolitics. So despite how Trump has been able to win a little bit of my affection and apparently a great deal of the country's, because I sincerely expect him to win unless there's some kind of 3 a.m. ballot dump that's
Right.
in Harris's favor, probably filled with dead people's names. But anyway, uh,
They have names.
yeah, it does. It nonetheless still concerns me. Like I, for example, he's bringing up Pompeo again and talking about how Pompeo is, going to be part of the second Trump administration in some degree. Uh, that sounds like a very bad idea to me, and it does suggest also that Trump is willing to be a tool of the military industrial complex or the deep state, whatever names we want to use for this.
Absolutely.
Uh, and so with that in mind, here's my read on the next 4 years. Like Radio Free Pizza, in the description, I say something like we analyze deep trends. So
Okay,
it's kind of the deep trend, however deep 4 years can be.
for sure.
So the what some podcasters colloquially would call Project Ukraine, like the proxy war in Ukraine to weaken
Mhm.
Russia, that's obviously winding down. And now they have this thing in the Middle East. I mean, obviously it's just a genocide and a
Yeah.
complete just shit show. But regardless, we have this thing in the Middle East. And if we start fighting with Iran on behalf of Israel, that will disrupt a lot of the Middle East supply chain for China to send things to Europe. So
Hmm.
that to me seems like the end goal. Like we fight Iran in order to screw up China's business so that China is slightly weaker in 3 or 4 years when we start some crap over Taiwan. Or
Yeah.
when China, to put it another way, when China has simply had enough of US imperialism in the Pacific and South China Sea, and they
Mhm.
decide to retake Taiwan themselves. So I wanted to get your read on that. Like, what do you think about that sort of geopolitical forecast on my part?
Yeah, I feel like you're thinking about it in probably more broad terms than I would. And I like that. I like that about you. And so for like I guess I've been so like um again like whenever Trump was originally inaugurated, I was so confident that he was going to become president. And now I don't feel that way, but also now as in this moment, I absolutely feel that way. And so now I think I'm like beginning to imagine what those next 4 years are going to be like.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I haven't put a lot of thought to it because I guess there's this fantasy in my mind that maybe this won't happen. Um, but that's a lie I'm telling myself. And now I know that it is going to happen.
Oh,
And yeah, if like I said, if we're wrong, I will be shocked.
I will be very glad. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, for
I
sure.
like to be right, but nonetheless,
It's like
hmm.
I'm certainly not a fan of the sort of geopolitical upheaval that you're describing. Um, and if anything, like I wouldn't say I'm terrified. I think a lot of people will have great reason to be terrified. And maybe I don't know how like the American populace will respond to that. Um, but
Hmm.
yeah, I think we're due for some big things. And I don't disagree with your analysis.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I hope that it doesn't pan out. However, that does seem to be the way that it's going. And I also should
Yeah.
say that if we get some kind of 3 a.m. ballot drop that swings it in Harris's favor, I don't think that she is going to avoid any of this. And
Yeah.
also to back up slightly, although Trump didn't start any new wars during his presidency, and I do think that he's more interested in just having business as opposed to conducting war.
Hmm.
In either case, it seems to me that war with China will be the end goal. Um, I was just before we started this interview, I was watching Garland Nixon and Scott Ritter and Gerald Celente and Joe Luria, who I'm not very familiar with. However, I'm going to have to acquaint myself. Nonetheless, I bring this up because Gerald Celente has, kind of a catchphrase: "When all else fails, they take you to war." And I see our situation in the United States as all else has already failed. So,
Yeah.
nah.
Yeah.
Oh
Well
God.
said.
Oh, thank you. I wish it weren't the case, but it does seem to be that way. And for any women watching this, you might want to become pregnant to avoid the draft because I don't think that you'll be getting out of it. That's
Son of a gun. Well, hey, if there is a draft, I will be visiting you and I will be staying for quite some time.
Oh, down here in Mexico. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll come back to the States whenever I feel it's most opportunistic to do so.
All right, good. I
And
mean,
I think like the idea of being a draft dodger is actually really heroic of me. So,
probably. I mean,
yeah.
you have been, I don't mean to insult you by saying that I don't think heroic is the right word, but you have been more, uh, for lack of better words, yes, you have been more heroic in terms of trying to organize the working class and so on. Like you've done quite a bit more than I have. So I applaud you for
Well, thank
it.
you. I will say as someone I've told you before that my intentions are to die here in the United States, and
Mhm.
I think that is something that I stand beside. And I think that also is just kind of like a reflection on the risk that I've already taken to um protect my values and protect the environment and the earth and this like the beautiful landscape of America. And so I've already taken those risks. And for me to stop taking those risks would be very adverse to my value system. And so, yes, I would love to draft, like dodge the draft, but also I might be up to some other stuff at the same time.
All right. Gosh, this is another funny kind of like yesterday we were talking about kind of our geographic differences with
Right,
you being, an anarchist organizing in Indiana or otherwise just living in Indiana
for
and
sure.
me being, well, gosh, really getting burnt out on organizing in general or trying to organize because I just found it ineffective in a liberal environment. So where I'm going with this, it's funny to me because although in the time that you've known me, I've changed my political perspective. Like I've become a tanky, for lack of better words. And at the same time, a lot of the tankies I admire would look at me no longer being in the United States and being so happy about it. God, I hate it there. But they would look at me being so hateful and tense towards my home country, and they would think, "Wow,
Mhm.
you're not just being useless to your countrymen, you're also being ungrateful." And that's a bad thing. Stop that, Zach. So cheers to you because you're, I guess, one of the anarchists they could celebrate.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also think there's some merit to being politically useless insofar as it's you live more freely. Like in a way I'm envious of you, but also I have to do what I have to do. But the days in which I take off, I'm overjoyed.
Ha! Glad you take some days off then.
Hey, you have to.
Yeah, geez. Uh, I guess I'm taking months or years off now. Although I wasn't really doing anything before, except mainly like just kind of sitting there thinking, God, this guy is an idiot. I wish he didn't come to this coffee shop.
Fair enough. I think maybe you can, and maybe we can explore this together, a reconceptualization of your place in the revolution and your contributions to it. And so it may not seem obvious right now, but again, we're having a podcast. Maybe people will enjoy this dialogue and take something from it. And you never know the impact that you may have as a residual force. Um,
Oh,
and
well,
so
thank you. I do like to imagine, I could be helpful. I would like to be helpful.
certainly. Let's not, I don't want it to get to your head, but maybe we could work towards reconceptualizing that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, I hope so. It's funny. You remind me a little bit of Indy of the Indie News Network. A pseudonymous fellow who I've just become friends with over the past 2 years. Uh,
Mm.
he he listed me as a non-political writer at some point. Like he did, just a small list of like, hey, here's people who are not necessarily in the Indie News Network, but who
Mhm.
are friends of ours. And yeah, and it amused me to be listed as a non-political writer. But the more that I look at what I'm doing, or what I'm writing about rather, it is kind of second order in a sense. Like it's
Hmm.
kind of meta politics.
Yeah.
I wrote this long critique of Plato's Republic a couple months ago. And that sort of thing to me is, well, yeah, that is politics, right? I mean, it's political philosophy. But at the same time, it's hard to imagine anybody who is not just a fellow nerd who would be interested in that sort of thing. Like, you have to be a philosophy nerd to care about that sort of thing. And to simply be a politics nerd doesn't necessarily guarantee you're interested in philosophy at all. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wonder if he considers you to be a non-political writer because you don't have an overt agenda. And
yeah,
maybe you do have an an overt agenda that I just haven't picked up on yet.
I do kind of have an overt agenda. Um, I don't know how well defined it is, or even to call it overt might be a little bit of a stretch, but I do think that it's pretty clear. Like I had this friend, at the coffee shop, somebody I actually like at that coffee shop. His name is Andre. And he once, I was describing to him my political projects or my project for political philosophy.
Hmm.
And he picked up on it just like that. Like it was like, oh, you're trying to force a Hegelian synthesis. And I was like, yeah,
Oh.
exactly. That's libertarianism. Yeah,
Not everyone would get that in the same way.
yeah. But no, he was just on top of it immediately. So yeah, that the idea of I am searching for the next synthesis to in our process of history. That's basically, yeah, that's essentially what I'm up to.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
hope it's overt, but maybe it's not.
I think it's admirable, if anything. And maybe by in that same vein, the revolution does follow you more closely than you think.
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I hope I'm being helpful in that case. You've definitely heard my criticisms of revolutionaries, like being boondoggled by their own idealism. Is a simple way
For
to.
sure. And I
Uh,
guess if you create a political synthesis, you kind of just have to let it go and see what happens.
yeah, that's true. I mean,
It could
gosh,
be anti-revolutionary.
a little bit. Maybe that's why I like Nietzsche so much because I'm actually secretly an anti-revolution. Mm,
Yeah.
all right. So let's see. I've sort of given you my criticism, over these past couple days, mostly in private messages, not on video.
Hmm.
Giving you my criticism that I just referenced a moment ago about revolutionaries being boondoggled by their own idealism. I have an even better way to put it now, actually. Okay.
Okay.
So, the Peanuts comic strip, right? Rest in
Yeah.
peace, Peanut the squirrel. But the Peanuts comic strip. So you have Charlie Brown and you have Lucy Schwartz and the football. So if the football is revolution and Charlie Brown is an actually sincere revolutionary, then I think of Lucy Schwartz as leftism. Like I think of that, she is the personification of the boondoggle, if you will. So
Okay.
I want to get your read on that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. As far as leftism, I would certainly say that she is liberalism
Ah,
and neoliberalism, certainly. Um, as far as my organizing with the left, I feel like it's so fundamentally different than your experiences.
mhm.
And I think that maybe because there's an entirely different philosophy behind what I'm doing and what people like me are trying to create and bring into the world. Um, and so, yeah, I'm trying to think of like not necessarily a counter analogy, but a different one. Um, yeah, I don't know. I want to say that maybe um I want to create more footballs.
Ah, well, that's fascinating. Jeez. I'm really gonna have to put a pin in that and think about it. Like I don't have an immediate response. That's really cool though.
Yeah, I would be happy to elaborate on that another time, perhaps in a different episode. But yeah, It'd be interesting to create more footballs. They can't grab them all, right?
No, yeah, I don't think so. Huh. Interesting. Huh. All right, I'm gonna try and not get too caught up in that.
Of
Uh,
course, of course.
so I want I did want to make this a little bit more geopolitics focused because even
Yeah.
though I have this tab of all these various like, oh my God, the voting machines in whatever county in Arizona aren't working properly, that sort of thing. There really is a lot of strange, suggestive of malfeasance stuff going on with this election. But
Oh yeah.
nonetheless, we're trying to focus on the deep trends, not get
Yeah.
caught up in the day to day. So I want to go back and talk a little bit about Ukraine. I was actually, so I mentioned I was watching Garland Nixon and Gerald Celente and Scott Ritter specifically. I wanted to mention Scott Ritter because he is a figure who has been, are you familiar with him at all?
I'm not.
All right. So during the run up to the Iraq war, he was a huge critic, and having been a weapons inspector at at an earlier time in his career,
Huh.
he like this is complete bullshit. Like Iraq does not have these weapons of mass destruction. And then he was caught up in following that he was caught up in a sting operation that I don't want to go into because it's personally embarrassing for him. I'm sure.
Okay.
There are a lot of details on that. I'll leave everyone to judge for themselves. Nonetheless, he has been, for the past 2 or 3 years, I guess 2.5 right now, he has been a staunch defender of Russia's interests in terms of their special military operation, to the point where I've heard him described as a member of Xenon as opposed to QAnon.
Okay.
If you recall, at the beginning of this special military operation, they used the Latin letter Z, which doesn't exist in the Cyrillic alphabet. And really, that's a seven and another inverted seven. So it's representing 77 years since the end of World War II when they defeated the Nazis. So it's a thing for them, for the Russians, I mean. And I this is all just trying to introduce, like, I've never ever talked to you about the war in Ukraine before. So I'm curious what
Yeah.
your read on it might be.
Um, yeah, again, very broad question. I probably don't have a broad answer for you. Um, I don't know. I feel like maybe I'm victim of propaganda or I've been victimized by propaganda because um it's so strange because whenever it comes to war, like especially modern warfare, you can watch a lot of it on Twitter. Like it's so I think a lot of the information that is like put out there about the Ukrainian war um is from like very strange GoPro perspectives and um I think it's difficult for me personally to have like a comprehensive view over that conflict. I understand that's been happening for quite some time, like much longer than most people would imagine.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I don't know. Like it's very strange. I feel like at least talking towards like in response to the propaganda that I believe has been fed to me, seems like Russia is losing, not doing that great. It sounds like they're little punks and they don't know how to fight. But
Oh,
again, that's I feel like that's the propaganda that has been spread to me. Um, and
I
so
would,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I could very well have just received the counter propaganda. Like, just at, I consider what you just said to be untrue. Like, I'll just say,
No, I'm extremely skeptical of that line of thinking as well. Um,
well, gosh, I mean, I was literally just earlier today, I was in a little Twitter tiff with somebody about this Ukraine war, and they said something like Russia wants to genocide 30 million Ukrainians because the population of Ukraine is like 37 million. And I was just like, you are completely crackers if you think that that's the case. Man, it's without getting into too many details, I regard this whole special military operation in Ukraine as Russia's hand being kind of forced, or more or less forced. Now, I only say more or less, really, because I like to believe that there's always a peaceful solution to conflicts. But knowing that Victoria Nuland, who I believe I mentioned in the Discord thread, knowing that she was there handing out cookies during the Maidan coup in 2014, it's that that is only one piece of evidence that I could point to suggest or evidence that yeah, Ukraine's whole government for the past 10 years has been mainly a CIA project intended to weaken Russia, with hopefully, and obviously this hope is not going to come to pass, but when it started, and really to say it started in 2014 is inaccurate, I think.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, there has been a long-standing effort on behalf of, or on the part of US imperialists or Western imperialists in general, to break up Russia. They think that it's a prison house of nations. I'm quoting some 19th century British man right now. It's too big for its own good. And if we could just balkanize it, if we could just break it up into smaller pieces, we could more easily control all of the various resources involved in it. And I spent years arguing with liberals about this. It's like they will just kind of say something about Russian oligarchs. And then I'm like, where do you think those Russian oligarchs came from? Do you think that maybe it had something to do with the shock therapy introduction of capitalism in the 1990s? Do you think capitalism maybe produces oligarchs? And they're like, nah, Putin's bad. He hates gay people. It's like, no, you're just retarded. Like, uh, uh, so yeah, sorry, I'm getting a little heated even just thinking about.
Yeah, I can tell maybe the Twitter tiff that you've had is not fully resolved.
Yeah, and that honestly, this comes up with social media and me a lot, and I assume other people. Social media just makes me angry a lot of the time.
Yeah, by design, I would imagine.
Yeah, certainly. Uh, so I should probably learn some better ways to blow off steam, but I'm a politics junkie. It sucks.
Hey, well, it gives us something to talk about.
All right.
I
Uh,
think I want to respond to the idea of like Russia genociding 30 million Ukrainians. I feel like there would already have been an escalation in that conflict if that were the case. And
mm,
maybe Russia's waiting for a more opportunistic, like, time in which to begin the genocide. Um, but
nah.
yeah, I don't buy into that at all. I don't know who said that. I think they might be a little silly.
Oh yeah, that was it was a fellow with a Yu-Gi-Oh themed account username on Twitter. So the fact that it's
Oh, okay.
that should be enough. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, a deep state plant. I understand.
Yeah, probably. It's funny how you can't really tell the difference anymore between who's like a deep state plant or a CIA operative on social media, or maybe they're just a New York Times subscriber. They're just,
Yeah.
you can't tell the difference. Those are just two
Or
equal.
just your average Yu-Gi-Oh fan. You don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Oh gosh. Oh man. Okay, well, okay, I just wanted to visit that subject with you for the first time because I think of that as the start of World War III, frankly. Or more specifically, I think of so it was not on February 24th. So that was the date that Russia launched its special military operation, or not war, as
Okay.
particular Russian pseudonymously named Rurik Skywalker. This Skywalker fellow who I follow on Substack, he has a really good, interior read on the whole thing. And saying that, he is not in the Xenon camp that I described Mr. Ritter as being in a few minutes ago.
Hmm.
He's quite a bit more nuanced and critical when it comes to the Russian state. But nonetheless, I'm glad I brought this up and circling back. So I think that there's a strong possibility that future historians will regard the start of World War III as the decision by SWIFT, the Society for Wireless International Financial Transactions, their
Hmm.
decision to cut Russia out of the international financial system. Gosh, it could have been March 14th, 2022,
Hmm.
22, but around then, I think that that would be a very strong starting date for World War III. Um, Now, maybe people listening to this will think that I'm a little bit, a little bit absurd for saying that, because that's not the start of a direct conflict between two superpowers. That's just
Hmm.
a neighbor bullying another neighbor, or however they might want to put it. But nonetheless, I think that even such criticisms really discount the degree to which international capital flows really determine our society at this point. So
Yeah.
that's why I would put that as the start of World War III, and why any American attack on Iran would simply be a continuation of that. Um, well, gosh, I feel like I've said enough already. Like you can put that together. I'm wondering just how you feel about that. If I am I propagandizing you very well?
You always propagandize me very well.
Ah,
Um, but yeah, I mean, I was going to ask why you think that would be the start of World War III as opposed to say like an invasion or a war with Iran. And I feel like you answered that question for me. Um, I think as far as historians go, maybe the Iran, whatever future conflict happens with Iran would maybe be the starting date they would put. And again, I think that's because of there being more of a direct conflict. And so for me, that's how I see these things kicking off. Um, but yeah, I need to look more into what you referred to that happened in 2022. And yeah, I would it would be interesting to see if I'm inclined to agree with you.
all right. Well, hey, I will do my best to provide you with whatever information I can on this topic. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear it also because I do know quite a few. I mean, the coffee shop that I've mentioned before, that is, there are a few self-identified anarchists who hang out there who are also
Mhm.
in that Rocky Four mindset. So,
Yeah, for sure.
all right. Well, we got less than a minute left on this recording. Is there anything
Okay.
you wanted to bring up, or should we just save it all for the next time?
Let's save it for the next time. And I hope there is a next time. I think we have a lot more to talk about.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think
Mhm.
once we get over the hump of this election, we can actually like branch out and discuss stuff like the special military operation in more detail, and also
Yeah.
review some of the aforementioned Skywalker's criticisms of it. Just see what comes up.
Yeah, I'd love to revisit that. That would be awesome.
Ah, hell yeah. Okay, cool. I'm excited for it. All right. Well, I guess that's it for today. Who do you want to win?